For such a time as this. It is a passage of Scripture found in the book of Esther, Esther chapter 4, verse 14. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The book of Esther is interesting in that it is not overtly sort of religious. It's just the story of Esther and her uncle Mordecai. And the Jews are in a difficult place. They face extinction by people who do not want them around. And Esther is a Jewish woman who is picked by the king to be her queen, to be his queen. Let me try that again. Picked by the king to be his queen. But still, there are people that would want the Jews to be gone. Namely, a man named Haman, if you read the book of Esther. And the Jews were in captivity at this point. They were not their own people. And so Mordecai comes to Esther and realizes that Haman has a hatred for the Jews and realizes that their very people, could face extinction. And he tells Esther to go to the king and to ask the king for mercy, for leniency. And so Esther is called to do so by Mordecai, not by God per se. We don't read that in Scripture. We don't read that God comes to Esther and tells her to do that, but Mordecai encourages her to do this. And he says, perhaps you have been prepared for such a time as this. And I think about Joseph. He faced difficulty in his life and was sold into slavery and then was imprisoned. But God had a plan for Joseph that required him to save God's people. And so Joseph is used for such a time as this. And Mordecai is saying the same thing to Esther. Maybe you are prepared for this moment so that you can save the Jews, so that you can save God's people. Maybe you have been prepared for such a time as this. But it's interesting. He even says to her, if you remain silent, relief and deliverance will arise. His faith in God is such that he says, if you choose not to participate, if you choose not to say anything, then God's going to provide us with an answer, and God's going to provide us with a way out. But maybe you are this way out. Mordecai's faith is strong, and he implores Esther to have her faith, to realize that there is something more important than herself. To me, this passage speaks to us as Christians. We don't always know God's plan to us. We don't, or plan for us. We know what God has laid out for us in Scripture and what He's called us to do in Scripture, but we do not receive divine revelations from God saying what we should or shouldn't do. But there are times when I think we can take this passage to heart. Maybe we're called to do something. Maybe we're called to reach out to an individual. Maybe we're called to preach the gospel to people. Maybe we're called to demonstrate Christ's love or show God's love for such a time as this. So hopefully this week you will take this into consideration. Think about Esther. Think about Mordecai's faith of whether Esther helped or not, God was going to provide, but maybe God has prepared you. But keep your eyes open, for maybe God has prepared you for such a time as this.